Hi, everybody, and welcome to this interview as part of the My Career in Consultancy so far. We are really thrilled to be joined by Martin Dannhauser this morning, and he is an alumni of Cambridge. Martin, welcome, and thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you.
We're going to crack right on with hearing about your journey and what you've been doing. So first of all, could you just introduce yourself, tell us what you studied at Cambridge, and what your current role is?
Okay, sure. Well, hi, everybody. So my name's Martin Dannhauser. I was at Cambridge quite a few years ago now. It was back in 2002. I started through till 2006. I studied history for 3 years, and then I did a year of management studies at the Judge.
Great.
Current role, sorry, I forgot about that one. Current role is I basically run my own consultancy now. So don't get too excited. I am the only person in this company. So there is one employee, and that is me. And basically, I started doing this sort of freelancing thing about just over 3 years ago now. And before that, I was working in a company called PA Consulting, which is about 3,000 people. And I was doing that since sort of 2011. So a bit of a gap between sort of graduating and starting at PA Consulting, but we'll come on to that, I'm sure, as we go.
Yeah, so I think what's slightly different about our chat today is that you've been in industry a little bit longer, so not a fresh graduate, and that's what we'll be looking for and focusing on specifically, as well as your experience of talking to new graduates and, you know, seeing how the way the world of work has changed for you as long as anybody else over the past couple of years. I think, though, it's interesting for us to go right back to the beginning and use your perspectives to our advantage. So essentially, how did you get started? How did you start your career in consulting? And I suppose, importantly, when you actually got there, what was your first impression?
So I sort of had two starts with consulting, if I'm being honest. And the first one wasn't a successful one. So I ended up on a graduate scheme with a transport consultancy, so quite shortly after I graduated. And almost as soon as I arrived, I sort of realized when I looked around the other graduates, and it wasn't the biggest company, but there were probably 8 or 10 graduates, something like that. And I was the only one with an arts background. So everybody else was, either sort of physics or maths or whatever. And it became quite clear quite early on that a big part of the job was doing a lot of data analysis, a lot of spreadsheeting work, basically. And I hadn't really done a huge amount of that in history, if I'm being honest. So I just felt I wasn't really well set up to do particularly well at that company. And I didn't actually last there for a huge amount of time. I was only there for just over a year. And I was actually, it wasn't the most successful starting point. So then sort of fast forward a few years, and I went into the civil service after that. I ended up in the counter-terrorism bit of the Home Office, which gave me some quite useful sort of security clearances for PA Consulting, which had quite a strong sort of defence and national security practice. So it was there that I sort of really started my consultancy career. That's at least how it felt to me. And that was a much more positive experience. And I really enjoyed my time at PA, which was, as I said, from 2011 through till 2018.
I think it's a really important message, which is that you're still kind of finding your feet and learning after you graduate. It's rare that you just land somewhere that you completely fit. It's kind of part of the journey. I think the key thing to explore is, obviously you came from history, consultancy is perhaps not a natural environment for that, but it's incredibly popular as a profession across a number of different student groups. So why is it that you think that consulting is actually so popular as a graduate career?
Yeah, well, I guess I can't speak for everybody, but I guess there's probably 3 main reasons, I think. I mean, number one, to be quite blunt, is that the money tends to be pretty good, especially as when you compare a management consultant sort of starting salary to other industries. The money tends to be good. I think the other thing is you do get very good training. I think that a lot of the management consultants will give you an excellent training and actually a really good sort of starting point to go off and do other things with your career. And I guess linked to that as well, it's just that opportunity to go and work across multiple sectors quite easily. So it's that you're starting off your career, you might know exactly what you want to do. I personally had no idea, but it's quite a nice way, I think, of having a bit of exposure to different companies, different challenges. So after 2, 3, 4 years, you've got quite a nice little mix of things you've probably experienced rather than just working in one part of one organization. So probably those few things I'd probably say.
I think it's interesting those three things even on a surface level become these kind of taglines and very, kind of broad concepts around what consultancy is. But those kinds of things don't necessarily belie what actually happens on the job and how that might differ across different firms, depending on size, depending on speciality, depending on the client base, location. But going in as a graduate and, expecting good money, good training, broad experience, what does that actually translate to when it comes down to the day-to-day? So how does consulting work? Let's start with how you actually, the client is the key in consulting. That's your day job. So how do you actually first get to work on a client project?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about my PA experience a bit more than the previous one. And I think that, it really depends. It really depends on just the individual, and it's just chance really, because basically there will be a number of projects that are running at any one time. I know some people that never went, their first day was on a client site. It was, right, you started, you go there because you're needed, there's a project to do. Other people I know, they will have spent weeks, sometimes even months before they actually get onto a bit of client work. So I think that, and to be honest, that's mainly just that is just down to luck, because they will, or the consultancy will sort of not know you particularly well. They'll know roughly what your background and skill set is, but it will be very much like there's an opportunity here, great, we need somebody to do it, versus other times there just might not be quite as much work going round, or there might be lots of graduates starting at the same time, so it's just a bit slower to get on things. So it really does depend in my experience.
Is there anything somebody can do starting out who's new to a firm to get themselves onto a project? So are there any networking tips, or
completely.
Strategically? Yeah.
This was always a really big thing in PA and actually, but when I say PA, I mean PA consulting. I'll just call it PA from now on. But yeah, in PA, but also in all other consultancies, networking is really important. So basically the way you get on projects is each part of the company will have a resourcing manager, and their job is to make sure that they won't be doing any of the finding of the projects, but they are basically putting people onto projects. So they want to get people, they call it sort of utilized, but people basically on projects as much as possible. So making friends with them is good, but making friends with people that you actually want to work with is really important, because otherwise you two just end up being, oh, right, Martin, well, we've got this project, off you go and do it, versus, oh, well, actually, no, I've spoken to this, for instance, I really wanted to move my career in a slightly different direction and work in more of the sort of the travel sort of sector. So I ended up sort of going, well, that's the partner in charge of aviation. There's somebody over there who does a lot of work with TUI and other companies like that. I'm going to make friends with them so that when they get a project, they don't even go anywhere near the resourcing manager. They just go straight to, Martin, are you free? Yes, I'll go on your project. So there's the sort of formal way of, if you almost do nothing, there'll be the resourcing manager to help you. But it's much better to almost to shape your career in the way you want it to basically make friends with those sort of senior people that are selling work in the area that sort of aligns with your interest, I guess.
And so in those early days, even if you feel like a bit redundant, like you want to get started, but you don't really know anyone, scoping out who's who and kind of trying to make those connections is important, right?
Yeah, completely. And actually, it's a real big thing, especially when they call it off the clock. So when you're off the clock, i.e. not on a client project, a big thing is going to have, coffees with people just to almost get your face known a little bit, so that when projects do come along, they think, Martin, I think he'll do a good job with me. I'd like to work with him, rather than just, it being down to chance and being down to the resourcing manager to sort it out.
And interestingly, that stems into career management as well. So your own career management whilst you're in a role, which is super important. So when you actually get onto this project, so what you're recommending for people when they're starting a new project? What to actually, okay, great, I've networked my way onto the clock. What happens?
Yes. Yeah, I'd say sometimes confusion. Sometimes there's a lot of things that sometimes happen when you start a new piece of work. I mean, there will always be sort of a statement of work saying, we, the consultancy, are going to deliver X, Y, and Z over this time period. that is obviously a really important document that you sort of understand, because that's what the person that sold the work will be. Well, that's what they promised to the client. So you really have to deliver against what's written there. And I think that there's some of it as well, which is just making sure that you fully understand what's that document is saying. I think there's, like in a lot of industries, but probably consultancy is one of the worst, there's a lot of jargon that gets used. And so being actually really clear about what things mean, what things actually look like. I remember there was a project I was on with Etihad, the airline based in Abu Dhabi, and somebody, I mean, whoever sold the job, I can't get it with him. There was somebody who sold the job who said, "Oh, something about parameters and a strategic model," and we looked at each other and said, "What is this thing? What are these parameters?" So we had to sort of basically make up what parameters and a strategic model actually was. But we didn't really, it was just jargon. So I guess my advice to people starting is, don't be bashful about saying, can you explain what that actually means, or can you show me what this looks like, or, oh, I've drawn something that I think is what this is talking about, but am I on the right lines or not? Because I think it's just so much easier to have those silly questions at the start, and then it becomes increasingly harder as you go on. So I would say that's an important thing as well, along with sort of understand, and back to your original question, which is just doing that sort of basic understanding of the company. Each company will have, a lot of information on the internet, their annual reports, just more general information. So it won't take long just to pick out a few things, just so you go in with a bit of an understanding of what the company's sort of about and things like that.
And sorry, adding on a question, which I think is really important, is about the dynamics of the client relationship, which when you're starting as a consultant, I think sometimes what's undersold, like we're always talking about skills, problem solving, frameworking, 7 steps, whatever. But actually the dynamics of the client, because I suppose they've brought you in because they can't fix something themselves, but that doesn't mean necessarily they're going to welcome you with open arms and be like, wow, all of your ideas are amazing. Sometimes there's a lot of change that needs to happen, and sometimes that can be down to kind of static personnel and things like that. So what's that like when you're going to the client and you're as a young graduate thinking, how am I going to deal with these kind of the different personalities?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I found that quite difficult actually, because look, as you said, there's obviously, we're not just there for the sake of it. Somebody somewhere has said we need to bring these people in. It's also very, very likely that there'll be some people that don't want you there. There are, for instance, they know that there's a change that's going to be made that will negatively impact on them. So there will always be people in sort of these client projects that won't want you in the organization. I remember as well, which was almost like, well, what do you know? And I find that question quite a lot easier to answer now, because I've worked at quite a range of companies over the years. But it was a thing like, when have you run a business? What have you actually done? And I found that quite a tricky question to really answer. Before I sort of built up a few years of experience, I found that quite a hard question to really answer. But you are right that there is, that there will be people that want you there and other people that don't want you there. And I think, again, as a junior or as a more inexperienced person, that's okay. I think you just need to sort of quite quickly work out who are the people who are going to be very welcoming, will give you lots of information, will be very helpful, and also the people that will be the opposite. And then you've almost got, and this is probably something that, especially as juniors, as sort of more inexperienced stuff, that's probably not for you necessarily to sort out. But I would say that, just saying there's somebody over there, not quite sure how we manage them, but then be proactive as well. I think we could do this, or I think we could do that, because with these people, what I tend to do is just tackle it head on and just have a conversation with them, saying, well, what do you want to get out of this project? What sorts of things? Just to almost, rather than them being very negative and over here, actually try and bring them in. I have had a couple of times where it actually just becomes very, very obvious that that person is not going to be part of the solution. And so you can try all the stakeholder management stuff in the world, but actually it's not going to quite work. But I think, very much the starting point. Again, do things as early as possible. Don't let things sort of linger for weeks and weeks. Just, there's a person over that doesn't really want me here. let's start building that relationship to work out, well, what is it that they're actually worried about, because it might be a very little thing or it might not be.
Yeah, and I think it feeds really well into that. You're talking about being from a history background and the analytical side of things, but actually there's a real kind of layering of skills that come into being a consultant, and empathy and everything else is so important as well. So it's about that myriad of skills. So you talked about going in there as a fresh grad and identifying things and how you've got better. How you now run your own consultancy, however many employees you have, Martin, it's still yours. How have you, and gaining that experience, how have you found the way that you approach projects has changed as you've got more senior and now, of course, are running your own projects?
Yeah, I think that one thing that, going back to how I would approach writing a history essay versus how I now do my projects, is with history, I'd spend probably not as much time as I should in a week, but I would be at the library a little bit, hoovering up information, reading a book, writing it down, and then I've got all this information, and then I will then construct my argument type thing and write my document. And it's almost completely the reverse, I think, with consulting. As soon as you possibly can, write down what you think we call it the storyboard, basically, but it's something that I was encouraged to do very much at PA Consulting, which is to answer the question, back to the deliverable thing that we talked about earlier, in terms of what have we actually been asked to deliver to the client. As soon as you possibly can, just write down what you think the slides will look like, so that then you can go, look, I haven't actually finished the work yet, but this is what you're going to get at the end of this project. If we do that, are you happy? Oh, well, and then you have oh, well, no, I was expecting a bit more in this area and I wasn't expecting you to do all that work. Okay, fine, great. And then you sort of know and can plan accordingly. So rather than doing everything and then going, da-da, here it is, and then the client says, that wasn't quite what I was expecting, that's not what I need. So I think it's that thing very much about being very as clear as you can as early as possible about, this is what you're going to get, this is how I'm going to approach the work, this is how I'm going to find out the answers to these questions. So that's, I think, that probably the big thing that I now have in my mind that I didn't have so much when I started, which is I know that we need to get here, therefore the end product is going to look like this. And then I'm also a lot better at going, I don't need to have all those conversations over there, they won't help me answer these questions, I just need to talk to them, right, fine, that's how I prioritize. So that'd be, for me, the big thing, really. It's just being really clear about what it is you're trying to get to, and then I think it just makes it a lot easier for you to then plot your way there.
And very interesting, that change of mindset away from siloed working as well, because when you're a student, and perhaps more when you're on a humanities course where you not necessarily relying on an engineering team or something to do something with you, you think this is a great idea, and yes, you've got your supervision things where you might test them, but you can go away and then come back with your essay, which is 30,000 words long, and go, isn't this brilliant? And then it's like, oh, you've missed that one thing. Whereas that change of mindset approach of let's scope out what the thing is kind of helps you quickly identify those pitfalls. So that change of mindset. What about in terms of people management and the working with your clients? And I suppose that place of authority you're coming from, perhaps as well as a sole trader, but have you found that you just have an intuition for people and projects that's built up over time?
I mean, people have tended to say that one of the things I'm better at is my sort of people skills. So I think the short answer is yes, you do, as probably like we were saying earlier, you do very quickly go, I've seen this before, that person's going to be a problem. I need to get this bit of information. Those are the couple of people I really need to get close to and work with, because they've got it in their heads and I need to get it from them. And also just those things where you are, I don't know, you're in a meeting or you just know that you just sort of get that sort of feeling, like you said, the intuition that something isn't quite right between different people in a group. And I just think the more experience you get, the more experience you get, actually, I think the more you would do something about it. Whereas I think that I could probably tell there was something up, but I just sort of go, oh, maybe it'll be all right. Whereas now it's like, no, something isn't right. Let's just straight away see what's going on and see what we can do. Again, it's probably a bit of a theme here, is just do things early, rather than letting things sort of fester and the weeks go by. Like, if you think something isn't quite right, just tackle it head on, because usually the intuition is correct that there is something that's up.
Actually, linked to that, which I think actually is quite important for consultancy or any of these kind of group working roles, is, before we get onto network, is actually, how do you manage up? So there's a lot of demands on you as a graduate consultant. And
yes,
you're new in, and you're not really sure who and where and how to challenge, but sometimes things aren't always right in terms of getting, being in your group and having your engagement manager or your senior analyst or whatever. Any tips for managing up if you feel like things aren't quite right, or you're not sure about things?
It's again, so I'd say being proactive is great. What I think the more senior people in the consultancies want is no surprises. Basically, they want to be able to deliver what they said they're going to deliver to the client. So the last thing they want is for you to have been spending all week on something, and then Friday you send them what you think is the perfect document. And just back to the client example, it's the same. What they don't want to do is go, oh, that's not what the client want, and now we've got a problem. So again, it's just being, just keeping them informed about what you're doing, rather than waiting for you to. I think probably the main point I'd say is, don't wait for it to be perfect before you share things with people. That's probably what it comes down to. I think that people will be much happier going, I've had a bit of a go, but before I do more work on this, is this on the right lines? What do you like? What do you not like? What do I need to do? And then they'll be able to tell you, and then by the end of the week you'll have a much better document. But I mean, otherwise you are just putting it down to luck that you have, interpreted everything correctly and you've done exactly what they want. So that's what I would say in terms of managing up, which is just be very. And then in terms of the other managing upwards, again, if you see things that you don't think are quite right, just tell them, because it might be a slightly awkward conversation, or it might be something you aren't quite sure about. But I mean, I would prefer to know if something had happened, or somebody wasn't quite sure. It's like, I'm not quite sure if this is the thing or not, but this doesn't seem quite right to me, and I didn't know if we should maybe do X, Y, Z. Again, being proactive about what you might want to do about it differently, rather than just say, here's a problem as well. So maybe just a couple of things there to think about.
Yeah, super helpful. I think particularly when you may come from a culture of like perfectionism,
right. Yeah, that's true. And that thing about, maybe it's me with my essays, but other people, it's like that ta-da moment, here it is. Well, no, actually, almost it's much better just to go, this is what I'm planning to do. This is me halfway through, and then rather than just going, here's what I've been up to. So yeah, very much sharing stuff early is really, really helpful.
Good, very helpful. So you talked a lot about people getting onto jobs in consultancy and the network of people, your clients, but actually also in terms of that career management. So we're always kind of trying to encourage people to network. The more you talk to people, the more you learn, pick up little bits of information. How important has network been in your career? Progressing it, finding out things, friends from Cambridge, beyond?
Yeah. For me, I could talk about various different things, but I've had two major sort of interventions, or two major things that happened with my network that have been really helpful. So the first one was my move from the Home Office to PA Consulting. It's basically a guy who I played a bit of golf when I was up at Cambridge. So he was a guy who was also in the golf team with me. We met for lunch. He said, "How's your work going?" I said, "Crap." He said, "Okay, well, why don't you think about consultancy, because you could be useful for a company like PA Consulting." I said, no, I'm not interested in consultancy. No, don't want to do it. We met for lunch again, maybe a few weeks later. How's work? Same story. So he ends up sort of putting my CV in sort of through him. And yeah, one thing led to another. Obviously, I went through the interview process, but that was how I got into PA Consulting. And if it wasn't for that sort of old Cambridge mate, I probably wouldn't have even applied to a consultancy. So that was number one. And then I guess the other one was I took a sabbatical from PA. They have this policy that once you've been at the company for over 2 years, you could take up to a year off, sort of unpaid unpaid leave, but there'll be a job waiting for you when you get back. So I've been at the company for a while. I took what ended up being 6 and a bit months off. While I was in South America, I got a call from a guy who was my manager at PA. Then he was my client when I worked at EasyJet. And he said, Martin, I know you're probably enjoying yourself far too much at the moment. You won't be interested in this, but I've got a project with TalkTalk, and I need 2 people to help me do it. Would you like to be one of them? And that was when I said, that sounds great. And that's when I started up my own company to work basically through his, and then work with TalkTalk. So yeah, those would be two big things from my network that if I hadn't have, I don't want to get like too, but yeah, if those things hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have been anywhere near doing what I'm doing today. I don't know what I'd be up to, but those were 2 big things for me anyway, from my network that changed what I'm sort of doing today.
I think the key thing there is some people feel like I don't have a big professional network, like I don't know loads of people when you're a student, and sometimes you really don't, and you don't have family that have done lots of things, but the people around you at Cambridge, you can create your network whilst you're at university, and those people, if they're your friends for 2, 3, 5, 10, 50 years later, will have changed and evolved and be doing things as well. So it's not just about that short-sighted, oh well, they're just a student with me now, but where might they be in 5, 6 years time? And actually those extracurricular sports and societies and groups that you're in actually are where you can form some really good bonds. So that's important. It's not just about, oh, I know another consultant at a firm who can help me.
Completely. And with consultancy as well, there's just, because people end up just, people from Cambridge do all sorts of different things. So yeah, I've got a lot of mates who do consulting. So I don't know what there's this thing that I'm meant to be doing. They'll have more experience than me. So I'll talk to them about how I might do my work a bit better. But then there's other people who are working in, in sort of big organizations. And again, and in fact, one of my mate, I was at Homerton, and one of my friends actually, he runs a company, like a finance company, hedge fund company, and they've got about 50, 60 people. So he was actually one of my clients. He said, Martin, can you come into our company and have a look at our marketing team? So yes, that was, I guess, another, he's just a mate of mine from Cambridge. But yeah, I've ended up doing a few days work with his company as well. So yeah, and you never know where people are going to end up. Of course you don't. But yeah, it's just really nice to just continue. I find anyway, to just continue to have your sort of network of friends from Cambridge, and then you never know, they might end up doing something that helps you from a careers perspective as well. But yeah, I'd say it's definitely the number one is their friends, but that's definitely number one. But I personally had a few examples where the friends have actually been quite helpful for a career perspective too.
And that professional network, because people move through firms, in consultancy, maybe after 4 years max, maybe 5, 6, it's not like a traditionally kind of 30-year career. So people will be moving and shifting. So those contacts can be helpful long term. So you mentioned there, coming into a team and, helping them with their marketing team and things like that. I think that the distinct thing with being a consultant is you are an advisor. You're a trusted advisor, which means I suppose you have to have the ideas or find people that have them to help you. And that's about kind of lifelong skills development. So how have you seen your skills development change over, since graduation to now? And how would you what advice would you impart that when you graduate, that's not the end, it's kind of the beginning of that development?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think there's a little bit of it as well, which is that I think simplicity may be one of the things that is really important with what I do now versus, maybe some things, maybe history, maybe to some extent, but I'm sure to other degrees to an even greater extent. You always get rewarded by having very sort of clever, intricate ways of sort of phrasing things and intricate arguments and and I think, and also sort of quite flowery language might be rewarded as well. Whereas I think actually what a consultant is basically trying to do is take quite sort of a lot of different opinions and a lot of different information and a lot of different sort of quite a lot of complexity at times, and trying to make it as simple as possible. Where I think that where I've personally seen consultants, and I just think, I don't quite know if that's helped, is when they just basically just shove everything into the document or the presentation, and it's like you've just taken something that's quite complicated and made it even more complicated. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make complicated things and make them simpler. So I would say, I don't know if this is 100% answering the question, but I would say that I think that probably when some of the things I was doing at Cambridge was you're almost rewarded for adding that bit of complexity and those sort of clever thoughts type thing. Whereas I think actually quite a lot of consultancy is taking lots of disparate information and making it as simple as possible. I also think that what I personally used to do was write, there's this argument, there's that argument, therefore the conclusion is X. Whereas now I do it completely the opposite way. You say, this is the conclusion and this is why, so that if a busy person doesn't have time to read everything, well, that's what we're doing here. And if you want more information, that's fine, that's at the back. But it's how do you present that information as clearly and concisely as possible, really.
And what about staying up to date with what works? So, there may be processes, technology, systems that can help your clients to streamline, to maximize, to market size, whatever. How do you stay on top of that to make sure that you have that awareness, that commercial awareness to actually help them?
If I'm being honest, I probably don't do loads of it actively. I mean, I don't think I'm a huge reader of sort of articles and things like that. I think it's more, the way that I would do it is more just what I've picked up from different projects. So I think it's much less how am I staying up to date with things by reading them or going to seminars and things like that. Maybe I should do a bit more of this. But it's more just what have I picked up from clients, which are the ones that are, because what tends to happen is there'll be, in any company, there'll be some parts of it that you think, oh, they're really motoring ahead with this, and then other parts that they might not be. So you might work, I don't know, if we talk about digital, technology and sort of more sort of digital capabilities, there'll be some companies just by their nature that will be miles ahead of others, just because that's sort of more of the company that they sort of are. So I think I probably get more of my sort of learnings from just being on the job more than anything.
So we've talked about all of the kind of the future. I suppose that always leads us back to where people are now, and that is starting out. And the biggest thing, I'd say 99.9% of queries I get at some point is about interviews. What is the magic formula of interviews? So we've talked about skills, we've talked about how you deal with the client, how you'll solve the problem.
Yeah.
Essentially, you have about 45 minutes to get across that you're going to be able to do all of those things. Of course, you interviewed, but then as your career's gone on, you've interviewed people as well. So let's talk about interviews. What is your, first of all, kind of, what's that process they're going into, as in what are you looking for, but also how does somebody really kind of focus that preparation?
So in PA consulting, but I think like in a lot of organizations, not just consultancies, it was very much sort of competency based interview. So give me a time that you've done X, give me a time that you've done Y. And I'm sure that people are very familiar with this sort of STAR sort of concept in terms of that. I think it was, I even stand for it's the situation, the task, the action, and then the result. So it just gives you a bit of a framework to then say, the so what is important. Like, you've done all this stuff. If you just sort of talk and say, I did this, but fine. But what was the end product? What was the good thing that came of it? So I'd say, so number one, when you're doing the competency stuff, just be quite clear about what it was that you did. Don't talk all the time about we did this and we did that. What did you do, and what was the benefit of what you did? So that would be one. But in terms of the actual sort of process itself, I think it's my experience is pretty standard. You do the CV, that will all be done by the HR team. So and then it will be after, I think the HR team would even talk to the graduates, or the applicants, I should say, and then they'll get whittled down to the number that actually attend the day, and there will be the competency based interview. There'll be a group exercise, and there's usually another something else that they're asked to do as well. But basically, I think that one of the people that in fact, the partner I mentioned earlier, who was the aviation partner, he used to quite like to get involved in the graduate recruitment, which not all the partners did. But and obviously after that, we've all spoken to the individual candidates. Then we have this sort of what we call a wash up. So everyone is like, you'll score the candidates for how they did in their per question, and then you basically then need to basically decide which are the best, however many out of the group. And so what he would say, and I quite like this, was fine, they're all intelligent, great, whatever. I've got two questions. Number one is, do you like them? Would you like to work with that person? So number one, would you like to work with that person? And number two is, can you put them in front of a client and trust them in front of a client? So I would say maybe just have that at the back of your mind when you are having the interview, because it might not be that you want the person that's a bit prickly and very clever about everything. Actually, am I coming across somebody who's a nice person who actually people will all want to work with? And then can they trust me to go and have that conversation with the client? So maybe just have that at the back of your mind as well, amongst all the other things that I'm sure people think about with interviews.
Well, those two things are essentially the bottom line of a firm, because if your team isn't working well, it'll affect the client work, and if the client doesn't like you, that's going to affect things. And you spend so much time to get it. I mean, in normal circumstances, but even virtually, you're still spending a huge amount of time with your team, aren't you, in a consultancy?
Yes.
And particularly when it comes to traveling and things, should you do that. I think there's also those things which we've talked about before, which is, don't be afraid to answer a question if you're not quite sure. You can clarify things, and don't be afraid to work through your question as well, work through the answers with them, because sometimes it's a chat as well, an interview. It's not just kind of answer on demand. So that's really important. I think particularly with cases as well, where you're not a consultant yet when you do a case interview, when you're trying to work through a case and go through your mathematical workings, or just kind of your common sense problem solving, but you're not yet a consultant. So at least if your rationale, and you're trying to talk to the interviewer about your rationale, is good, they can at least see that you've got the common sense, rather than you kind of beavering away.
Yeah. And so just one other thing I thought about is that even though I've talked about that partner guy and my experience, I do remember there were a few people that used to just quite like the fact that I'm a tough interviewer. It was almost like a badge of honor to be, I asked them all these really horrible questions. So there will be some, I think, so I guess just be prepared really for both people to have a more of a conversational interview style, and others who might, for whatever reason, want to go, I want to know about this, I want to know about that. And what I remember those two guys were most interested in was, because I was working in a sector at the time, so the difference between a sort of a sector and a service, but I was working in a sector, so they really wanted to sort of drill down and make sure that the individuals actually had a really strong sort of knowledge base about that particular sector, and were able to explain why that sector was of interest to them over sort of a period of time, which I personally felt was a little bit unfair, because if they were literally a graduate, then they probably wouldn't have had a chance to have a deep interest in a sector for years and years and years, unless it was to do with their degree. But yeah, I think so. Anyway, just be prepared for different styles of interview, and if you are applying for either a sector or a service, do your homework, so that, because you will be sold in your consultancy as an expert in that sector and service. So again, just be prepared to talk about that as well.
Good advice. And sometimes the mean interviewers are just trying to see how resilient you are too. It's not always about having the perfect answers, but if you can cope with the pressure of the questioning, because equally your clients might do that to you too.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. Well, I suppose it wouldn't be 2020 or 2021 if we didn't talk about COVID-19. And
yes,
I just think the radical way it's changed work and the deployment of services and that client relationship. So maybe from your kind of personal experience, how have you seen it change for you? And obviously you must have colleagues in the services. Do you see, how have things changed? Do you see that going forward? Bearing in mind, graduates joining the workforce. Any advice there, or anything to share?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll talk about my experience and then I'll come on to graduates in a sec. I mean, for me, it's changed hugely. I mean, before this COVID stuff, I would have to go and work wherever that client was. I would go to their office and I would work in their office, usually 5 days a week, sometimes four, but usually 5 days a week. So wherever that office was, I would be there. So my Etihad example, I was in Abu Dhabi for a few months. I spent quite a lot of time in Luton with the EasyJet and TUI. Spent time in Manchester with it. So wherever the client was, that for me, absolutely major difference. I used to be there the whole time, and now what is it? So I'm coming up for nearly 12 months working on my current client, which is a company called Philip Morris, and I still haven't been to an office. I actually met one of my colleagues. He's the first colleague I've met face to face in nearly a year, and I met him last Friday for a pub lunch in Grantchester. So huge difference. In terms of then how you then do your work, well, I was actually really worried because a lot of my work is talking to people, getting information from different groups of people, and then bring them together as well, so that they can come up with a sort of combined view and a bit of a solution. So I thought it would be a lot harder than it actually has been. I actually don't mind the working from home thing. I thought, as somebody who's relatively extroverted, somebody who likes spending time with people, I thought it would be really bad, but I don't mind it. And actually, I quite like how you can sort of be talking to somebody and be basically writing the information from them at the same time, rather than doing that thing of scribbling something in your notebook. Then you send it back round a few days later, then they don't look at it, and then you've got the wrong end of the stick. So there's a few things that I found quite helpful, and there's something called Miro as well, which we use, which is almost like it's not the same, it's not as useful, it's not as good, I should say, but it's basically a tool you can use to try and do online workshops. So it's much easier doing it face to face, but at least there's something there. So I found, so the short answer on that is it's changed for me quite a lot. What do I think is going to happen in the future? Don't really know, but I'm presuming that I won't go back to doing 5 days a week in an office, maybe ever. It presumably it will go down to something like, I know, 2 or 3 days a week. I think that's quite standard now. I will probably have to mirror what the company does. So if it's a company that basically no one is back in the office, fine. If it's somewhere where actually there's I would just have to do what they do. I think probably I'll have to do more of the big sort of set piece meetings, so the big sort of workshops, which actually I quite enjoy. So for me, that would be fine. If it is more everyone's not working in the office, but how many people need to come in on this particular day for a workshop, that's fine. So that would work with me quite nicely. In terms of graduates, I think this is a bit of a challenge. I'm sort of, because there's a lot of things that if this makes sense, I'm sort of quite comfortable doing this working from home thing, because I sort of know enough about what I should and shouldn't be doing now, having done consultancy for, well, I guess over a decade. So I don't know everything, obviously, but I know enough to sort of be quite comfortable working from home. I think probably a bit of a challenge from for sort of recent graduates is to try and make sure that they are getting the knowledge and the expertise so that they can actually learn from senior people in the organization. So again, just on the other hand, just because you're sitting next to somebody doesn't mean you can't sort of pick up the phone and speak to someone and get that advice and knowledge. So I just say maybe the big thing is just keep on being proactive, keep on asking, because senior people, they get this. They know that it's tough for recent graduates, and I know that it's a big worry for a lot of organizations about how do they make sure that people, new joiners, but also people at the start of their career, how are they getting the information, knowledge they need? So I'd say just keep being proactive and keep asking for help and guidance when you need it.
Great, good advice. Final question. What would you say to yourself, or what do you wish you'd known before entering consultancy as a graduate, if you were going to speak to the you now?
Do you mean when I'm on projects and things, or do you mean actually thinking about going into?
Yeah, I just think when you're going in, so you're thinking, right, I mean, this is a perfect time. I've literally just done a workshop on applications. So, Martin, going in, about to start application season for consultancy. What do you wish you'd known then that you know now that you might tell you back then about going into consultancy?
I would say at the application stage, I know I made the mistake of either not, I don't know why I did this, but I either didn't really research the company very much at all, or I did so much that I just had a brain full of information, but yet nothing. So I would say do enough research on your company. You need a couple of little snippets is quite helpful, just to be able to go, I saw this figure. Oh, this is interesting that you do this. So I'd say don't try and know everything about the company. You don't need to. Just pick out a couple of the interesting things generally, but also where you are interested in working. Because again, it'll be quite nice, I think, to be able to be told, oh yeah, I know that you do these things. It's really impressive you've done that recently, but my personal interest is actually over here, which I've seen you've done X, Y, and Z. That sort of thing, I think, would be quite a nice thing to be able to explain, and that just shows a bit of interest as well in why you are sat there in the interview, not just, oh yeah, this is just another. I want to do consultancy, and this is just another one type thing. Why are you interested in that particular company? So that's what. And then I guess just in terms of actually when you're doing the work. Oh, I should say one other thing, which is almost just decide what you want to be focused on in the short term. I know PA Consulting did this. I think most companies do, which is you apply for either a sector that you want to work in or a service that you'd work in. So, sectors would be like my example of defence and national security. It might be healthcare, might be transport, that sort of thing. And then the service would be more sort of strategy, or what I do, which is organisation design, or sort of IT, whatever. So I think also just be able to, there's no right answer about this, but just pick the one that you think would be the best thing for you. And again, be able to explain why you've chosen that one above others. And then, yeah, when you actually get on the project, I'd say some of the things we've spoken about already, which is just being proactive, I'd say is one of the most important things. Just have a go is really, really important. I remember coming from the Home Office, which was quite a bureaucratic organisation, where you ended up having to get lots of things checked, and you weren't. My experience as consultancy is pretty different. You are very much encouraged to go, you've got a brain, use it, and it won't be perfect, but do something that's probably 80% right, and then we can make it better together. Okay. So I'd say the importance of just having a go, being proactive, is probably one of the most important things, I think.
Great, so much good advice. Okay, that's it. We have come to the end of my questions and all my questions. Hugely grateful to you, and we're going to be making some of what you said into a blog as well, so we'll make sure that we share that. Are you on LinkedIn or anything, Martin, for people to find you?
I am. So yes, if people want to find me or whatever, then great. And yeah, if anyone wants sort of, I should say, like, the reason I got in touch with you a while ago, Emily, was to sort of say, look, I've just moved back to Cambridge. Can I be helpful, type thing? So yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch to have a bit more of a chat about whatever it is, then just contact me. So that's fine.
Lovely. All right. Huge thank you to you. We'll let you get back to the day job, and we will be posting this soon. Catch up, and if you want to catch up on any of the other talks in this series, then please just go to the YouTube channel or go to the Catch Up on Past Talks page from the Career Service. Okay. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.